Thursday, February 11th, 2021, 6:32 p.m. I'm calling the Board of Selectmen meeting to order. This meeting is being recorded. This is the second meeting in which we're negotiating with Strategic Land Ventures regarding a proposed 40B development at Shingle Hill. As I've noted in the past meetings, the developer has come before the Board of Selectmen with a local initiative proposal, which is so-called friendly 40B. And in this model, the Board of Selectmen is given the opportunity to negotiate with the developer for conditions that might be applied to the development, under which, through mutual agreement, the Board of Selectmen will issue a letter of endorsement. If such an agreement can be reached between the board and the developer will take that letter of endorsement to the state, come back with a certificate of eligibility, and go to the zoning board for their comprehensive permit application. Now, if the Board of Selectmen and the developer do not reach some sort of agreement on the LIP endorsement letter with some set of conditions on the project, the developer will return to the state regardless, using a different path, obtain a certificate of eligibility, and then go again before the zoning board under a slightly different process. In any case, the part that we're in right now is the phase where we're seeing if we can negotiate these conditions. The Board of Selectmen can only negotiate conditions that the Board of Selectmen does not deny or approve the particular project. All right, so since last meeting, we've received some additional information from Strategic Land Ventures, and we've also had some additional time to converse with the Board of Selectmen over the results of the past meeting. So before we get into the discussions, I wanted to revisit a little bit of what we talked about last meeting, modified by some of the information we received and the conversation that the board has had in this past meetings. So, Mr. Engler, where we stand right now is we're certainly willing to work with you on the MassWorks grant for water supply. That seems like it would be beneficial. We're in favor of grants along those lines, and as long as we can work out an agreement here, this is a reasonable thing to do. We want to set the unit account number aside right now and leave that up to you, but we do want we continue to want the density requirement. The ratio of 3 to 2 to 1 units that you kept in your original proposal. And as far as the AMI discussion that we had last week or 2 weeks ago, wherein we had asked that you reduce some or all the units to 60% AMI, and you declined to do that and gave us some numbers surrounding that. So what I'd like to propose tonight, and we'll see if we can hash out a little bit, if we set aside our request for reducing the AMI, we know that also you were unwilling to, well, we had asked if you would, if Strategic Land Ventures would put 500,000 into the CPC conservation allotment. You said that you would do that, but only under certain conditions, including getting an arrangement with MECT. What we would like to do instead of that is the same $500,000, but this donated to the Affordable Housing Trust, tagged for the support of housing and rental assistance. And also, we're considering taking the allotment of the 500,000 that we suggested that we would move towards fields and put the same into the Affordable Housing Trust, so that they would have a $1 million fund with which they could, which they in turn could use to mitigate some of the rental costs around town for whoever it seemed appropriate for the purposes of affordable housing. So that's where we stand on some of the items last night. And so we can talk about those a little bit. And I also want to get into the discussion of traffic and safety tonight. So those are my opening comments. If you want to make some comments of your own, please feel free to do so, Mr.
Engler. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. For the record, Jeff Engler from Strategic Land Ventures at 70 School Street. Can I rehash or repeat what you said, just so I think I have, or I'm clear on what you're saying? So the mitigation, so the MassWorks grant, and I looked into that. I mean, basically, I've identified probably the best consultant in the state, and that would be at my nickel. And as she described it to me, the municipality almost has to do nothing. I mean, other than obviously sign where necessary, but she and we do all the heavy lifting relative to the submittal requirements. So I'm encouraged to hear that the board is receptive to that. And then as I'm understanding, instead of the donation to the Conservation Trust, you're looking for a $500,000 donation to the Affordable Housing Trust or some designee for affordable housing. And then you want another 500,000 in place of the 500 you requested for the field? Is that what, or 500 and then the field? That part I was not clear to me.
In place of the fields.
All right. So you're asking for $1 million donation for affordable housing to some designee or to your municipal affordable housing trust. Am I clear on that?
That's correct.
Okay. And then relative to the density, you're hopeful that we can reduce the density, but in lieu of those requests, you are not steadfast on a number, or I'm not sure I'm interpreting correctly what your guidance is in that area.
So we want the density, the ratio of 3-bedroom to 2-bedroom to 1-bedroom to 1+, to remain the same in your original proposal.
Right. Okay.
And we won't issue any constraints on you with respect to the unit count at this time. Okay.
And then I have one other question. Was there any discussion on the DEP consent order and the potential to tie into municipal sewer?
At this time, we would prefer that you remain with your on-site septic proposal as you initially proposed in your initial proposal.
Okay. But perhaps that could get further discussion at a later date, or is that off the table? Or hard for you to say?
Well, that's hard for me to say because I don't know what we're going to say in this next meeting or so. So okay. At this point, we're not really interested in hooking up to the town sewer for a number of different reasons.
You're not interested in that. Okay. Okay. Well, I appreciate your suggestions and your position. It's a little bit different than I anticipated, but not necessarily in a bad way, just in a different way. So I'm not sure if there's something that I should say specifically in response to those, or if we should have a discussion on the other issues, or how would you like to proceed?
You know, I'm actually fine if you just want to continue having discussion on the other issues and think about what we said. Fair enough.
Yeah, that is, and then I have something to add maybe later in the meeting that I think hopefully the board is receptive to. But why don't we talk about the other issues first?
All right. So let's talk about traffic and safety. And obviously we're challenged somewhat because we don't have the final designs. We have obviously received lots of concerns from residents and opinions from traffic safety experts and fire department. And where we want to start a discussion tonight is we want to talk about sidewalk support and well, basically bicycle and pedestrian access, mostly pedestrian. We're not going to be bringing up a second entrance requirement tonight. So mostly what we want to do is talk about the business of how people can actually walk in and out of that site and have more reasonable access, foot access to town, because right now they can't do it at all. And if any other board members want to put their own details around that, feel free to speak up.
I mean, Mr. Chairman, I don't want to interrupt some of the other board members that might have thoughts, but I mean, there's no sidewalk in School Street. So it seems odd to us that the town would be pushing for a sidewalk internal to our site that leads to nowhere, because there's no pedestrians in front of School Street or near our entrance. Moreover, there's no real place to walk. So that's why we had said if the board was more inclined, which I know the trust is not, to have some walking trails that lead to other walking trails off our property, we would certainly be receptive to that. But to create a sidewalk internal to our site that's never going to be used because people aren't going to walk anywhere, that just, that doesn't make a lot of sense. Would rather spend the money on the Affordable Housing Trust or the shuttle than put an internal sidewalk that is not going to be used.
We want to investigate the possibility of extending the sidewalk to make it available to the development.
Extending it where?
Along School Street, probably on the, I think it's the western
East
side.
There's currently sidewalk on the east side up to the 128 South on-ramp.
Mm-hmm.
And that's within about 125 feet of the entrance to your property.
Right. Well, I'll need to think about, I mean, first of all, I need to talk to my design team to see if we can even do it in light of some of the other requests that your traffic peer review consultant and fire department have said relative to width of the preferred roadway, because I think we would need to add at least 5 feet of width to our road in order to accommodate a sidewalk and a curb. Might even be a little bit more than that. So that's the first order of business. So I can look into that, Mr. Chairman. I don't have my technical team with me, but it's something we could investigate. For the record, I don't think it's a great idea. I understand conceptually or theoretically why people want it. And maybe I've seen this on other projects. If we let's just say for discussion's sake, we could incorporate it or design to it a condition where we need to build it if there's a sidewalk on School Street. But I think I remain, pretty, I remain in my position that to build that sidewalk and then not have sidewalks in School Street, it's not going to be used. It's just not a good, it's an expensive ask, and we want to do things that have benefit to as many people as possible. So maybe there's a way, if the town makes the investment on a much more significant sidewalk infrastructure on School Street, thus we can tie into that, and once the town has done that, we're obligated to build a sidewalk, once again, presuming we can do it technically. We may consider that, but I just don't think we want to build a sidewalk and then never have any connectivity anywhere on School Street.
Yeah, Mr. Engler, if I may, I mean, we're asking you to to accommodate the sidewalk not only into the development, but also along the street. We realize, and as Jeff Bodmer Turner had indicated, it needs to go extended a couple of hundred feet, and it would have to cross the street at some point. But we could pick, certainly, safety officials could pick an appropriate spot for that crossing. But our thinking is not that we've got a sidewalk to nowhere. And this development is within a mile of the schools. And we fully expect that there will be some children that will probably walk. It's not an unwalkable distance for kids. And it's pretty dangerous to be walking along the street to walk up to their home. So we're pretty opinionated about having that happen. We know that the grade is fairly steep, but it may be steep in sections, and maybe you can work on that to make everything fit together.
Yeah. This I do know. Let's just say, once again, for discussion's sake, we said, all right, we can do it relative to the width. I do not think we can do it where it's ADA compliant, because I think ADA compliancy requires no more than a 5% grade in any location. And I will not say this with 100% certainty, and I will consult with my civil engineer, but I think it's almost impossible. I think it's impossible for us to meet or not have any grade more than 5%. So let me do this, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Just so I understand, a sidewalk internal to our site, and then out on School Street, and where would our obligation theoretically end? At what location?
At 128, where the sidewalk ends right now.
128.
But it does have to cross, because that sidewalk is only on the eastern side of 128.
All right. Well, rather than talking hypotheticals and theoreticals, your ask is noted. Let me talk to my design team and see if it's physically even feasible, whether or not we want to do it or think it's a good idea. Let me see what the parameters of the conversation are from a technical standpoint, and I will endeavor to get back to the board in short order.
From the town standpoint, this is a safety issue, because people will try to walk the street, the access road up into the property. And without a sidewalk, that's a very dangerous thing to do.
Right. Okay. Well, your request is noted.
With respect to the ADA compliance, you might have the option to apply for an ADA waiver, or you might simply need to do switchbacks or whatever is appropriate to make it ADA compliant. We'll be willing to listen to either option.
Yeah, we'll look at it. We'll look into it.
With regard to other issues of traffic and safety, do board members have anything else that they want to cover right now?
I do not at this time.
So we'll note that the second entrance requirement, obviously, we've had requests about that. We're going to leave the ZBA to evaluate that. We don't expect to ask you to redesign the project around that at the board level right now. We want to make sure that we have access for the sidewalks. Okay, now I did want to make note about some of the environmental concerns. We did get your memo on Monday, and before we draw conclusions with respect to the environmental side of things or have further discussions, we want to go back to our Conservation Commission and consult with them regarding the two positions. So, Mr. Engler, you had talked about other things that you might want to mention in this meeting.
Are we done working from your, I think, I forget the date, but the document called Possible Conditions for the 40B Project, draft 121. Are we done working from that, Mr. Chairman, or?
So I did want to go over, like I said, I was hoping to get through environmental tonight, but I'm afraid that we do need to go and have a conversation with our Conservation Commission. So I think this is going to take a little bit, another round of meetings to sort out the environmental.
Well, what are you going to be talking to them about? Because we're before them, as you know, for our ANRAD, but we will not be filing a notice of intent until after we have a permit.
I'm aware of that. We want to talk to them about the position that you're taking on the wetlands conditions and the request that we made. It was based in part on feedback that we received from our people who are conservationists in town. So we want to talk to them about that, and we couldn't do it this week. We got your comments on that on Monday. So we'll do that as quickly as we can.
Well, respectfully, Mr. Chairman, I don't think it's a big secret to indicate that the conservations in town are very much opposed to this project. So I would, ask the selectmen to understand the context of their comments. Secondly, I would also say that we're not asking for, and because we can't, everything we've proposed is compliant with DEP regulations in the state, everything. And we're fully confident of that, and we're fully confident that the process will play itself out to show that to be factual. And that's one of the whole purposes of 40B. And respectfully to Manchester, the wetlands and the resource areas that we're talking about are no more or less important than wetlands or resource areas in Rockport or Gloucester or Fall River or Hingham or Newton. And that's how the state looks at it. So I know people participating in the call tonight are very passionate about that, but the laws of 40B are very clear, and we're very confident that everything we've proposed is going to be compliant with ultimately what DEP will require of us. I certainly respect the board's desire to do some diligence and talk to the Conservation Commission, but I would ask that you understand that, and I would also ask that our or recognize that our ask of you all will be no different than if we do a conventional 40B. We're going to need the same waivers for either project. So it's not like I'm withholding or that these are negotiable items. They're not. We need these waivers to do this project, and we're entitled to these waivers, you know, under 40B. So it's a different discussion very much than, well, can you lose a few units? Can you build a sidewalk? You know, can you do this, that, or the other? You know, can you change the fenestration, et cetera? Those are all a little bit more open to negotiation. Our need for these waivers is not. It's very clear. So I think it's important to recognize the distinction between that part of the application and other parts that we're discussing. So because it's, whether we do a LIP or whether we do a conventional 40B, our waiver request is going to be the same. So I think it's important. Now, are there other things we can do relative to environmental considerations? You know, some of which you identified relative to what's going on in the building, or what are some of the features that we're going to have? Absolutely. But relative to compliance with your very stringent local bylaws, that's not something I can negotiate on. So I just want to, you know, make that clear to the board.
Mr. Bowling,
Yes, Mr. Bob Turner.
Mr. Engel, with all due respect, your memo of 121, which was the response, the detailed response that you gave to the possible conditions that we had submitted to you back in January, says that we would require adherence to the Manchester Wetlands Manchester Wetlands Protection bylaws. Your response was, the applicant is assessing the request. It's likely that a few waivers from the local wetlands protection bylaws will be necessary in order to construct the development. There are 19 waivers that you've asked for. And this is not a few waivers. It's also 19 days after you originally submitted this memo. And now you're saying this is a no negotiable condition. Why wouldn't you have said that earlier in this whole process than at this point? I don't understand.
Well, this whole process is a negotiation, and I will take responsibility for using the term "a few." That was a misrepresentation. We dug into it deeper with my team, and we went through the bylaw exhaustively, and that's what we need. I don't make any apologies or about what we need. We need what we need, whether it's 19. I've been involved in projects that need 50. So 19 is more than a few, yes, but we need what we need, and that's what we need. So.
And what is it that you need out of these 19 regulations and bylaws that you're asking us to waive?
I'm not sure I understand the question.
Well, you go from everything from definitions to the use of home rule authority, to performance standards, the burden of proof, establishment of a no build zone and no disturb zone with the resource area buffer zone.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not sure what the projects, you've picked a place to put this project that's a very environmentally sensitive place. You picked the place. We didn't pick the place and say, oh, come on, let's negotiate. You picked the place. And then you say, I'm not going to negotiate on buffer zones.
I can't negotiate. It's not that I'm not going to, I can't. We cannot adhere to those waivers. We can adhere to we cannot adhere to those local regulations. I don't make apologies for that. What we can adhere to is all of the Department of Environmental Protection waivers, all the state regulations. We can adhere to all of those, which under 40B is what we're required to adhere to. So I'm not sure, I'm not, yes, is this site difficult site relative to many? Yes, it is. But honestly, would I rather be working on this site or a flat site that has no wetlands, but is surrounded by 200 residential neighbors? I would take this site every day and twice on Sunday, because I have a lot of experience with the other site, the other dynamics. So
Well, I don't know what your experience is in building in environmentally sensitive areas, but this is a very environmentally sensitive area.
Yeah, with all due respect, it's no more environmentally sensitive than lots of other projects I've worked on that have vernal pools and resources. The state doesn't look at Manchester-by-the-Sea any different than any other municipality, relative to how it applies its regulations. It just doesn't. And the fact is, Manchester doesn't have 10% affordable housing. So you have a burden of proof to show that these resource areas are of vital concern that outweighs the need for affordable housing. And that burden of proof is huge, but don't take my word for it. Look at all the case law and all the other cases that have come before it on similar issues. I'm not trying to be argumentative, but this is just something, if you want to talk to me on density or some of the other issues, let's talk, let's negotiate. But I'm not trying to be difficult. I'm just telling you, we need these in order to build the project.
Well, our approach to this is that we need to do our due diligence to protect our water supply and to protect the environment in an area that is surrounded by conservation land.
And I appreciate that. And the people that were representing you, I would ask you to ask them this question. Will this project comply with all DEP regulations? Not will it comply with all Manchester local conservation requirements. Will it comply as designed? And I know there's some additional details. In your opinion, will it comply with DEP requirements? That's really the question you should be asking.
And that question is the question that we're going to be asking of our Conservation Commission, which is our local board that deals with the DEP requirements and administers them in Massachusetts, in Manchester, Massachusetts.
Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Mr. Whitten.
Mr. Chairman, good evening, members of the board. I don't want to get the meeting sidetracked, but I just feel compelled to respond to Mr. Engler's suggestion that state law is the only relevant matter here. That's wrong. It's wrong as a matter of law. It's wrong as a matter of policy. Every rule and regulation in play in the town of Manchester is in play right now. Mr. Engler needs to ask for a waiver from each of those regulations, and then he needs to demonstrate that but for the waiver, the project would be rendered uneconomic. So it is wrong and untrue that only state law applies. Waivers are granted locally, and if they're not granted locally, they're not granted. So the applicant must demonstrate to the board, not the Board of Selectmen necessarily, but certainly the Board of Appeals, that the waivers are necessary to keep the project from being rendered uneconomic. Otherwise, we're simply living in a world of anarchy. The town of Manchester's regulations are in full force in effect on every comprehensive permit project. Mr. Engler knows that. And the applicant must obtain a waiver when necessary and must demonstrate why the waiver is required. Otherwise, why has anybody gone to town meeting in Manchester since the town was incorporated in the 1600s? It makes no sense. The rules and regulations are in full force and effect. He can certainly request the Board of Selectmen to support waivers that will be granted or not from the Board of Appeals. That's perfectly permissible. But it is wrong to characterize this as only DEP regulations apply. That's simply wrong as a matter of law. And we have 45 years of legal support for that statement. So the better way to approach this would be to suggest to the Board of Selectmen what waivers he thinks are absolutely necessary to build the project. And then the Board of Selectmen can seek assistance from its consultants and its other boards, and then the process can move on. But to throw out a statement that the entirety of the local wetlands bylaw has to be waived is a very difficult way to proceed in negotiations of this sort.
John, I didn't suggest, with respectfully, listen, I don't disagree with a lot of what you said, and we didn't request that the entire bylaw be waived. But let me ask you a question as an attorney. Do you think I'll have a hard time proving that the project is uneconomic if the town makes me adhere to a local bylaw where I can't bring the road to the project and thus I don't have a project? Do you think that will be difficult? If it's not, my uneconomic is I have no project, which most of these bylaws adherence to would not allow me to build anything. I don't think I'm going to have much of a problem proving an uneconomic when I can't build unit 1, let alone, unit 135.
Well, I'd only suggest, Mr. Engler, that using that logic, then you might as well apply for a project on Mount Greylock. I mean, that's just not how it works.
Sure it is. John, I've been through this as many times as you have, and I know how the law works, just like you. And if the board or the zoning board or whomever doesn't grant us a waiver that we need to build the project, yes, the burden of proof shifts to us to prove that it's uneconomic. And if I say we can't build our road and thus we don't have a project, that's not a very difficult assignment for me to prove that the project is uneconomic. And then the burden shifts back to the town, as you know, to indicate that that waiver is so critical to issues of health and safety that you have to have it. And because you're under 10%, as you know, that threshold and burden is very, very, very high for the town of Manchester-by-the-Sea. And I feel confident in our position, and I know you'll advise your client appropriately on the likelihood of a successful outcome should they push that position. So,
Mr. Chairman, all I would say at this point is that conversation that Mr. Engler is throwing out there is a conversation for a different project, not a project where you approach a town in a negotiable position. That is drawing a line in the sand, and that is the traditional 40B. And if that's the route Mr. Engler wants to take, he has every right to take it. And then 50 years later, we can have a conversation about whether this project ever got built. I don't think that's a productive approach. You have applied to the Board of Selectmen under the LIP process, and that's a negotiating process. It begs the word friendly, because friendly it suggests that there is give and take on both sides. So to talk about the fact that in litigation you might prevail certainly doesn't sound like a friendly application to the Manchester Board of Selectmen.
John, I agree with you, and I feel like I bent over backwards. What I'm trying to say, and I'm obviously not communicating it very well, these waivers are necessary to build the project. Bottom line, the ones I've identified, we need these waivers to build the project. I'm not drawing a line in the sand saying, oh, I'm over, I'm just being aggressive and trying to ask for a lot of things I don't need. I need these waivers to build the project. You want to talk to me about the height of the building? You want to talk to me about a sidewalk? You want to talk to me about contributing to a shuttle? You want to talk to me about widening the shoulder? Let's talk. But John, to position it like, I'm drawing a line in the sand based on the writing of the local wetlands in the town, I cannot build a project without the granting of these waivers. And if the town doesn't want to, or the Board of Selectmen doesn't want to support an application with that understanding, well, we can conclude these discussions. But I think it would be a misstep if the board has the opportunity to get lots of other mitigation. We haven't even talked about a few of the things I was willing to consider, understanding that these waivers are necessary for me to move forward. That's the position. I'm not trying to be a jerk. I'm just saying that what we've identified it's not negotiable like some of these other things. That's what I'm trying to say.
Okay. All right, I think you've made your position pretty clear. I think we do need to go and talk now, given that clarity, to our conservation people, and then come back and see what we can do on the environmental side. There's still some other conditions that we wanted to talk about there that you've already addressed to some degree. So let's take the time on our side to go with this list to our Conservation Commission and get the advice and consultation we need, and then come back to you. So I'm going to have to talk to them to give an exact time frame for that but I'll
Mr.
do
Chairman,
that tomorrow.
Can I respectfully ask who you're asking? Is it Michael DeRosa, who's the peer review consultant to the commission? Is it the agent? Who are you asking for guidance on
No,
these issues?
actually, I'll be talking to, I expect, well, the board will, provide additional input into as to who they want to talk to. We expect to talk to the Conservation Commission themselves. This
All
is
right,
a,
well, I understand it's a big issue. I can listen. I hate to be a pessimist and naive, but I can pretty much tell you what they're going to say. So, some of the other things that I was going to introduce that I think are meaningful to the board relative to, I'll just cut to the chase. I was going to talk about taking the entire floor, the fourth floor, off the building, which I know is a huge deal to the board and to the neighbors, and doing that. And also talking about the architecture. You want more clapboards and shingles, you want white, black window. I mean, we'll work with the town. Those are some of the things that I can figure out a way possibly to make it work. The wetland stuff is not one of them. So if you guys want to draw a line in the sand on that and we amicably go in different ways, that would be unfortunate for both of us. But
Mr.
so
Bowling?
look, we're not drawing lines in the sands here. We're trying to, so part of this process for us, because you understand this process, obviously. So the Board of Selectmen is in this difficult position where we have to try to distill the interests of the residents with respect to honestly, bluntly mitigating the impact of your development on the town. Its culture, its resources, many different aspects. Obviously, we can't establish all the conditions we want because you've never agreed to them. We never reach an agreement. So we're in the position where we have to go back and try to get from knowing that there is some, unreachable ideal on our side, try to get the set of conditions which will best address the concerns that are most important to the residents. It's not a particularly easy task for us to do. It's difficult from an educational standpoint. People don't, to even now, don't understand that this is the way this process works. They would prefer that the board simply say no to you, walk away, and think that it would actually be not approving the development. It is a difficult task for us to discern what really is important to the residents, and to then come up with some set of conditions which is going to be economically viable. And I'm not particularly enjoying it, but it's what we have to do. So we're not trying to draw a line in the sand that nobody's going to cross. We're trying to figure out if there's a compromise. So,
Mr. Chairman, I recognize that there's 89 participants on this call, not including, members of the board and myself and Mr. Witten, probably 80 people, give or take, that are on the call because they want to stop the project. I'm not naive, but you know what? There's several thousand people in town that probably don't care anything about this, and some that probably will think it's a great idea and are even going to live here. I understand the board is tasked with a very difficult situation, but I also understand that this area of town has been identified for future development, and the board is even contemplating 40R opportunities, further commercial development, other, you need affordable housing, you need a rental housing. There's all sorts of benefits for the town that I know this board recognizes. Not to mention, at our expense, we'll be bringing water to the site, maybe sewer, maybe not. There's lots of benefits to the town, and not to mention you can get over 10% and not have to deal with any 40Bs in the future. So I appreciate the position the board is in. But as you know, Mr. Chairman, better than I do, you guys are acting in the best interest of the entire town. And I think there's a lot of things that are not getting brought up that benefit the town, other than are we adhering to a specific, local conservation bylaw or not. So I think it's a bigger consideration than that. I know you have a hard position. I get it. We could have just gone to mass housing and done a totally different project. We'd already have our site eligibility letter by now, and I'd be applying for my permit with the zoning board. I chose not to do that because I wanted to work with you guys and find a project that we can agree to. I still am optimistic we can do that, but there's some areas that we've talked about tonight that are giving me pause. So I'll take a step back, wait, for your additional guidance and move from there. But, I don't have, as I've communicated, an indefinite amount of time to and my feelings aren't going to be hurt if the board says, yeah, we just can't get there. But I think it's, this, but I think people on the call need to know, as you've said, I'm pregnant on this deal. So whether or not we do friendly or not, we're not going away. We're going to do something. So, but I think we can benefit, and I think the town and you all can help shape this project. Will it be everything you want? No, it won't. Will it be everything I want? No, it won't. But that's part of any good negotiation and compromise. So I'll shut up and stop talking, and we can move on to the next area you want to discuss.
Mr. Boland?
Eli, if I could.
Yeah, go ahead, Greg.
Just to put a period on this particular topic in terms of the wetlands and the waivers, it might be helpful if Mr. Engler, if you could just give a brief sentence or two on why each of those waivers are needed, so that we can understand more particularly the reason for the request.
Yeah, I appreciate the ask. I think what I'll do, and as my homework, is we'll provide a detailed written response for the board to all of those areas. But some of them, I'll be honest, not many, but we asked for them because the language is so vague that it's open to huge interpretation. And when you're dealing with a $60 million project, we can't be in a position where we don't know what the ask is. So some of it deals with just the language in the bylaw in certain sections is not well written. And when we submit our response, we'll indicate as much. And the board might say, well, this is, yeah, you don't need that waiver because this is what it means, or this is what we would commit to. So I will, here's what we'll do. The next Board of Selectmen meeting, I will submit something in writing early next week, and then I will bring my technical team to the next meeting, and you can ask questions and they can explain it in technical terminology as to what it means. But I think it would not be a good use of the board's time if I walked through all the waivers and explained, what we need or what we don't need.
So what does that mean in terms of what we will receive from you between now and our next meeting?
Well, I identified in the memo, many wetland bylaws section, wetlands regulations, some of which are definitions, jurisdiction. We're going to provide you with a written explanation on why we need each of those as it relates to the plan that we proposed.
That's what I asked for previously. I think that's a very helpful way of approaching this issue.
And we will do that for you and explain it. We will do it. I often tell my team, don't write it like only an engineer will understand. Write it like people that are not engineers will understand. So we'll try to put it in a narrative that people can understand what it is that we're talking about, with the necessary technical explanation as required. And we'll submit that early next week, and you can chew on it and hopefully maybe be helpful to your commission. And then if you have questions in advance of the next hearing, please provide those to us, or direction, or if there's something somebody knows that we're, not understanding, please let us know. But we'll be prepared to, answer questions and or speak to any of those at the next discussion.
Thank you.
So then in our next meeting, we'll be discussing more of the environmental, and then we're going to come back to the sidewalks based on what you find with your team.
Correct.
And if we have any more detailed comments on the environmental ahead of that weekend meeting, we will also send them to you. So, unless you want to talk about our AMI discussions or some of the other things that you were talking about being prepared to talk to us tonight, I may turn and ask the public if they have any comments or questions on where we are right now. I mostly wanted to get through the traffic and safety. I thought that was going to take quite a bit longer.
So, Mr. Chair, I don't think I have anything to add to the analysis as I submitted. I mean, in lieu of all the other things the town's asking, we're just not going to contemplate, writing down any units from 80 to 60 or writing down any market units from market to 80. I mean, if the town said, well, we don't want the $500,000 in affordable housing, or we don't want the sidewalk, but, the analysis stands for itself. I mean, and I don't think those aren't controversial numbers, because those are, defined by the state. The cap rate we applied is conservative. So those valuations are, I feel very comfortable with what we submitted. So we're just, not going to entertain those requests unless the town were to seriously whistle a different tune in some of these other areas.
So again, let's go back and clarify that, because I wasn't really quite clear on where you stood there. So what we said at the beginning of this meeting was this proposal that you keep the 80% AMI, but take the 500,000 that we previously talked about in fields and the 500,000 in CPC and put those instead into the Affordable Housing Trust.
Mm-hmm.
Is that a position that you would support or not?
In general, I would say yes, depending on how some of these other things shake out. But I do not, yeah. So is it $1 million? I'm not sure if it's $1 million, but it's not, I don't know, Mr. Chairman, but in general, compared to some of these other things, I think I could get to a number, if not exactly that, pretty darn close, that would make the town happy.
All right, so let's keep chewing our way through these other items so that we have the negotiable pieces in one place, and then see if we can get to an agreeable outcome. I understand you can't commit to this.
Well, hold on. Apologies, Mr. Chairman. Attention. So
Life goes on.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chairman, I think what I'm going to do too, I don't know if we're going to talk about anything else tonight relative to the requests of the town, but after this meeting, in the interest of everybody's time and, not wasting my time or your time, and hopefully getting to either a yes or no, I'm basically going to put everything on the table. Here's what I'm willing to do: height, density, mitigation, sidewalk, no sidewalk, etc., and make it pretty clear in a very easily understandable submittal. And then the board can say, this is worth doing or not worth doing. Maybe there's a little tweaking, and and then we just figure out where we are. Because I think I have a pretty good sense of what's important to the town and what's less important.
All right. Then at this point, will open it up to questions from the public. Ashley Oakes has her, wait, actually, were there any other comments from board members before I do that?
Yeah, Eli, thank you. I've just got one question of Mr. Engler, and he mentioned early on some ideas or thoughts with regard to the design of the structure, which quite a few folks in town, I think, are interested in terms of reducing the massing. And I'm just interested in what your thoughts are, because I think that's something that is on the table as a negotiable item as well.
Yes. Well, I'll just put my cards on the table. We've looked over the last 2 weeks of how we could get a floor off this building. And I think that would be material to the town and to the neighbors. And if we're able to come to an agreement, I think I think we would be willing to commit to that. I think we and our design team think it would be silly to take a floor off and then do a pitched roof, which effectively is going to add another 14 feet. So we take a floor off and then we add the height right back. But there's lots of other ways other than the roof line on how we could change this design to make it what we've heard more like Manchester. Is it more clapboards? Is it more shingles? Is it simplified colors? Is it window colors? Unfortunately, correct me if I'm wrong, I don't think there's a design review committee in the town of Winchester. But if there's, some ad hoc committee or whatnot that we could work to or work with to try to incorporate some of those design elements, we're receptive to that. And making it more like Manchester. I mean, we're not, this is for Manchester, clearly a big building. We're not going to be able to make it look like an oceanfront manor, but there's lots of different ways that we can, our architect is terrific. So if we hear some things that are important, allow us to try to incorporate that. But taking a floor off this building would be, in my humble opinion, huge and a huge effort. I haven't done a 3-story rental building, if that gives you any indication. At a minimum, they've been 4. So this would be the shortest one that I've done that approaches this kind of density. So we're willing to, work, but I don't know who we're working with on some of those design ideas. I mean, what we don't want to do, and this has happened, is we have 10 or 5 people say do this, and then 5 or 10 people over here say, oh, I hate that, because architecture is subjective. So we would just like, some group that's assigned with giving us some input on something that, or ideas that they want us to incorporate. But I don't know that the town has a board or a group like that. So I don't know how we get there other than before the zoning board saying, hey, here's our latest pass of our building. What do you think? And having them comment on it. So we're definitely open to architectural suggestions. We recognize the height. We're willing to figure out a way to get to the 3 stories, which I think would be huge under this friendly 40B scenario. And some of the other details on what the outside looks like, we're willing to listen. So that's what I would say about that.
All right. Well, that's definitely a task that we should take on with respect to formulating how you would interact with the town and that, what group you would talk to. And we can definitely do that. So I'll put that down as something for us to get back to you on as soon as we can.
And Mr. Chairman, I'm sure this is a statement of the obvious, but that would be a condition of our agreement. I mean, we're obviously not going to do a total redesign, of the building in the next 2 weeks. But, as a condition, it would be a 3-story building, and the applicant would work with this group, et cetera, because you know what I'm saying, Mr. Chairman?
Sure. Yeah, I understand. We have the chicken and egg problem of we can't have the full designs right now, so we have to paint some generic language around it. Yep. All right. I'll open it up to the public now. Ashley Oakes.
Hi, thank you. I have a question about the sidewalk. And I don't understand why the decision of whether or not to have one is tied to sidewalks in the area. So my question is, what are pet owners and their mobility challenged friends supposed to do when they want to walk their dogs or get exercise for longevity?
Well, Mr. Engler, I think that's going to you.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, and I'll defer, as you just did direct me. Honestly, this site has, we own lots of acres not being developed. There'll be plenty of areas on the site that are, listen, I'm a dog person, but there'll be tons of areas on the site where you can take your dog for a walk that doesn't require you to go down a sidewalk to School Street.
Okay, I was just looking at the topography, and it looked like the residences were so vertically above with some pretty significant retaining walls that I thought that when people would reasonably walk down there, it would be very unsafe as designed.
Walk down to the street?
Walk on that road. I think people will want to walk on that road if they live there.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was one of the issues raised tonight, but as it relates to, are we still talking about dogs? Or are we talking about just pedestrian access in general?
I'm using the example of pet owners wanting to go out or needing to several times a day, and also trying to incorporate the other folks in the area who might not have easily be able to walk and might need the ADA compliance and the critical part of just exercise to everybody in that community.
Well, we'll have an amazing fitness center on the community inside the building. So people that want to exercise are going to have lots of opportunities to do it without leaving the building. And we have plenty of woods. And as a dog owner for 44 of my 48 years, there'll be plenty of areas on the site to take your dog we have the program includes a pet wash. So obviously.
Okay, so will you be just recommending that people do not walk on that road? Is that, will you have signs to keep people off?
Well, it remains to be seen whether or not we do a sidewalk or not, but I mean, the road is going to be very wide, whether we do or don't, and we're not going to, it's not going to be illegal for people to walk down the street if they, let's just say for discussion's sake, we didn't have a sidewalk. People want to walk out to School Street, they'll have every right to do it. But as it relates to people having exercise or allowing their dog, relieving their dog, there'll be ample opportunity at this project as currently designed.
All right. Mr. McMillan, you were next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My name is Alan McMillan. I am a Rockport resident, and I'm a 34-year member of the Conservation Commission in Rockport. I come over to Essex at least 4 days, to Manchester at least 4 days a week to use the Manchester-Essex Conservation Trust land trails. And on the commission, I've been on the Conservation Commission in Rockport, like I said, for 34 years. In my 34 years, we've never had more than 2 requests for waivers on any one project. And when I heard requests for 19 waivers, I went, whoa. And the attorney, John Whitten, is correct in what he said about that. You cannot waive all of those because this project will have a major impact on the wetlands around the property. It will be cutting down significant portion of forest land, which is occupied currently by deer, fox, coyotes, owls, etc., which I hear and see frequently in the woods. But that's beside the point. My major concern is the wetlands impact here. There is currently no sewer out there. So this is either going to require a major expensive project to extend town sewer out there or an on-site sewage system. And where will all that wastewater go? The only place it can go is into the wetlands, cedar swamp, and the surrounding area. I don't think any of those have been addressed. So I believe that the Board of Selectmen is absolutely correct and that there needs to be further discussion with a public meeting with the Conservation Commission over those issues alone. And as for the woman who just spoke, Ashley, I believe it was, talking about walking a dog, I think it's insane to think that you're going to have over 100 units up there and no sidewalk on a public road. Think of wintertime with icy roads and people walking in the road and cars trying to negotiate that hill
Mr.
climbing up.
Chairman, is there a question that we have here?
So
The question is simply a statement. I believe that the Board of Selectmen is correct in wanting to have further conversation with the Conservation Commission. Thank you.
Ms. Panetta.
Yes, good evening. And thank you to the Board of Selectmen for your service to the town. I had a question, if I may, and you'll decide if this is appropriate for Mr. Whitten, as those of us who live in town, and I'm sure the Board of Selectmen as well, try to determine the quality of these negotiations and whether they're being conducted in good faith. How often is it that Mr. Whitten, as an attorney in these processes, has to jump in to correct what he perceives to be major misstatements of fact with respect to the law and the process for these developments?
So Mr. Whitten jumps in when he thinks he needs to. He responds to questions when I ask him to. He responds to queries in the interim when staff ask him questions or when I forward information from the developer to him. I don't really know how to answer your question in any real quantitative manner, except to say that Mr. Whitten is the town's counsel with years of experience in 40B developments. And he is the person that we rely on for advice with respect to the legal aspects of these negotiations.
Yeah, I'm just responding to the forcefulness with which he seemed to be having to insert himself to make sure that the developer statements were accurate or not misrepresenting the law.
Okay, fair enough. I'll accept that as a comment.
Thank you.
Sandy.
Hi there, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi, Sandy Rogers, 82 Old Essex Road. Thank you all. And it's good to see that there's some movement in thinking about reducing the height of the building. I was a little confused in that you can't redraw up plans, but I think it will be important to understand, are you able to reduce the height yet still have the same footprint, and how much square footage, are the units square footage changing, would the density change? I guess getting a handle on what that net overall would look like would be important to understand to go forward, versus just we can take a floor off without understanding it. So I think some level of diagramming will be needed going forward, and just wanted to understand the expectations. Thank you.
Mr. Engler, did you want to speak to that?
Yeah, based on our early review, we can fit 250 units in the third floor, so that's 3 stories. So that's what we're preparing to submit. No, come on. I don't get a smile out of any board members from that. The footprint will
We
change.
expected at least 300.
Yeah, the footprint will change.
I did smile.
The footprint will have to change slightly. It's not going to change dramatically, but we're going to be adding in an area that is the least impactful. But I've committed to this board that if we lose a floor, the densities, we're going to lose some units. I don't know how many, but it's impossible to lose a floor and not lose some units. But I've committed to this board, the proportionality will stay the same. So in general, you know, the square footages of the units will not change. So how the layout works exactly, we're still working through. It will be less than 157 units. It would be in 3 floors, and the proportionality would be the same as the application that's before the board now. And the board can condition it as such in a development agreement that your building will be 3 floors. The unit will be, the units will be proportionate to what was submitted. So I acknowledge, we're not going to have a fully designed plan, but on the issues that are important to the board, you can condition it so that the parameters are set.
But you'd understand the footprint on the actual site to understand, what more would need to be cleared, etc. Like at least that level of information will be understood, right?
I mean, I would say this, the amount of clearing I think is probably, or the delta is almost 0. I can't say that for certain, but would basically be adding footprint to area that was already cleared in the previous plan.
Okay, thank you.
And to the naked eye, it's not going to look dramatically different from the footprint that was already submitted. We're basically elongating one part of the building and changing another part around a little bit. So it's not like the footprint that you see before you. We're going to come back with something entirely different. It wouldn't make any sense. So, hopefully that answered your question.
Okay, I guess it's still early, so, well, thank you.
Ms. Cross.
Thank you, Bill Cross, 31 Smiths Point Road. Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question to Mr. Engler?
You may ask a question, and if it's appropriate for Mr. Engler to answer it, he will be the one who answers it.
Okay. It would be helpful if Mr. Engler if you could elaborate on your choice of this site. As Mr. Bodmer Turner mentioned earlier, it is a site that you've chosen, and it contains a number of characteristics. So we'd like you to tell us what other sites have these characteristics of your proposal. The 7 characteristics that we've enumerated in a letter to you and asked you to give us a list of these comparable projects elsewhere are the following. 1, steep grade. 2, curvilinear access road. 3, long access road. 4, steep slopes on either side of the access road. 5, extreme vertical separation between the development site and the town road, School Street. 6, high unit density. And the 7th, which we realize is off limits tonight, no secondary access road. Can you talk about at least the first 6 characteristics all in one place, if not the 7th?
So I'm going to keep this exchange on a relatively short leash, because Mr. Cross, when you opened your comment, you said that you referred to a letter that we had sent to Mr. Engler. And I believe that that's a letter that you may have sent from a group that's a private citizens group, not the Board of Selectmen. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, that is correct. I should have said that I am president of the Citizens Initiative for Manchester Affordable Housing.
Okay. So I want to make something extremely clear here. That group is a private citizens group. It's operating on its own. And the Board of Selectmen is operating, responding to the LIP application from the developer. And insofar as the list of questions is relevant to this particular project, I'll allow Mr. Engler to respond to it here. But the short leash that I'm going to establish is if this goes anywhere into the realm of this being a conversation between the developer and the Citizens Initiative group under this board meeting, I'm going to cut it off. All right. So Mr. Engler, if you care to respond to any of the...
I'm not going to respond to everything directly. I would say every project has unique challenges, and many of the questions you've asked, we already answered that to the board, not to your group, but to the board's traffic peer review consultant. We submitted a response several weeks ago. That's a matter of public record. There's many other projects that have lots of issues that this project has none of. Are there challenges to this site? Yes. I'm developing a project right now on the water in Situate that had many other projects or many other characteristics of an environmental nature that just this does not. And it was equally as challenging, if not more so. But I'm not going to go through my resume of projects that, you know, exactly align to this. You know, I've done projects, you talk about density, I've done 250 unit projects on 2 acres. All right, we have 17 acres here. So you know, the other projects that other municipalities find, you know, issues with are not relevant here, and vice versa. Every project is different. So I'll just leave it at that.
I was just asking for a list of projects which compare to this project and this site. I wasn't asking anything about your resume. I was just asking for what are comparable projects that have these 7 characteristics. Because it's hard for Manchester to take your proposal in context without understanding how it compares to site safety elsewhere. This appears to be, as Mr. Heber suggested, the single most dangerous proposal he knows of anywhere in the Commonwealth. If you can't defend it against that, Mr. Engler, how can you defend it?
Saying that? Is Mr. Hebert on record as saying that?
You were there.
I don't recall him using that terminology, so.
We await your list.
I have a project that Mr. Hebert.
Stop.
Thank you.
Mr. Cross, you're done.
Thank you.
Anybody else with any questions or comments? All right. We have a little bit of homework to do on our side. Mr. Engler, the Board of Selectmen is actually meeting on Tuesday. We will talk about schedule in that meeting, and then I'll get back to you after that with some proposed dates for getting back together again with you. And if you want to send me an email with estimates for when you're going to get your pieces to us and also proposed dates, I would appreciate that.
Yep, I'll do as much, Mr. Chairman, just so I'm clear on my directives. I think what I've been asked and also what I promised. The big one is clarification and explanation relative to the waiver request list as it relates to the recent memo and the Manchester wetlands bylaw, or local bylaws, I should say. And then I'm also, in full transparency, based on what, and also the sidewalk. That's a big one. We have to assess, if we can do it, what it might look like. So that's number 2. And then the third one is in full transparency. I'm basically, in the interest of time and hopefully drawing this to conclusion, I'm going to put my cards on the table relative to, what we can do and what we can't do, what our ask is, and, what I need from the town. And I think that will, drive us to a conclusion, one way or another, positively or not. So that's what I should be able to have. The wetland stuff I definitely can have early to mid next week at the latest. The sidewalk might take a little bit more time from my engineering team. All I can say, Mr. Chairman, is this has my full attention, and thus it has the full attention of my team. I'll talk to my civil engineer tomorrow and circle back with Greg and copy you relative to, an approximation on when we can submit that. And I should be able to have my, for lack of a better term, proposal to the board at some point next week, once I know what the sidewalk situation is. Hopefully that makes sense.
All right, we will, Ann Harrison, I'll recognize you in just a moment. We will be putting together a list of, well, we'll get back to you on the environmental stuff as soon as we can. Ms. Harrison.
Sorry, I pushed the wrong button. I do not have anything to say.
All right. Problem solved. Any other board members with any comments or questions? Greg or John Whitten?
No,
I'm good.
thank you.
Yeah, I'm good, Eli. Thank you.
All right. Then I'll take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second.
Second. Who was the second on that? I think it was Ann. Oh, it was Jeff. All right. So moved by Becky and seconded by Jeff. Any discussion? All in favor, Ms. Harrison?
Yes.
Mr. Round?
Yes.
Robert Turner?
Yes.
Ms. Jakes?
Yes, please.
Mr. Bowling votes yes. Good night, folks.